All right, so I wanted to talk about my SNES and Super Famicom shooters. And start right off the bat. This is alphabetical. So the first one here is Acrobat Mission. Now, this is kind of an unknown game. Obviously, it's a Japanese exclusive, but it's pretty fun. Your ship has a lot of fluid rolling animations to it. You've got little boosters that like fire off whenever you travel left and right. And it's pretty fast-paced. It's a lot of fun, actually, and not many people know about this one. Funny thing, it was when you die, you can kind of guide your ship to where you want to land. You can actually kamikaze into enemies to take them out. So it's a shame it didn't get ported. It's a pretty good game. I recommend looking it up. It's not too expensive. So this is Axelay. I don't know what else to say about Axelay that hasn't already been said. It's a Konami classic. It's a hybrid shooter, so you got half vertical, half horizontal stages. You've got weapons that you can cycle through and increase their powers. And if you get hit, your powers, your level goes down. So you have a little bit of built-in hit point that way. Fantastic visuals. It's got a lot of that Mode 7 or pseudo Mode 7 flying 3D thing going on. That's the most famous boss there, that fire boss. So I recognize what a good game this is. It's actually not one of my favorites. I just don't reach to play it very often. But in most general circumstances, most general regards, it's considered a classic. So Biometal is an interesting game. So get this out of the way. The music in this game is from the 90s techno group 2 Unlimited. And it's played on a loop, and if you like that particular song, you probably won't after playing this, because it's just kind of drones on and on and on a loop, and it's kind of grating after a while. I wish I had the Japanese version where they actually had an original soundtrack, and I thought that soundtrack suited the game better. But music aside, it's an interesting gameplay mechanic here in that you have this sort of rotating shield of spheres that you can fire out, and then you can use it offensively or you can use it defensively, and you're going to need it because there's a lot of bullets that come at you, and that shield will protect you from the majority of them. So risk reward, how offensive do you want to be, how defensive you want to be, so you're constantly thinking about how you want to play the game. So it keeps you on your toes, and that makes it a very fun game. It's a little bit on the hard side, but man, that music, just I shut it off. I can't even play it with that music. Next up is Blazion. So this game it's kind of slow and dragging. Your ship, you can actually shoot a shot that stuns enemies, captures them, and you can morph with them and kind of become like this hybrid character, and that's kind of cool. But that's probably the really only cool thing about this game. That the pacing is very slow. There's lots of dead time, wait time. It's almost like they tried to artificially make the game longer, and that you're just sitting around waiting. And it's for that, with people who have short attention spans, you probably just get bored and shut it off, because it becomes a chore at some points. It's a shame, because it had some potential with that mechanic. This is the Caravan shooting collection. I got this when I went to Japan in 2016, and I got it from a small shop called Friends, a little bit on the north end of Akihabara, and just a couple bucks. What it is it's a collection of the Caravan games that came out on the Famicom. I think it was Star Force, Star Soldier, and Starship Hector, and those are old school Famicom games, so they're 8-bit, and those days, there was no turbo. There's no rapid fire. You literally got to spam the fire buttons or use a controller that has rapid fire. So it's old school, and it's nice. I like getting compilation games, so this was a no-brainer. I probably don't play it that often because I do have the original cartridges as well. But it's kind of cool to see them all collected here. So Shoplifter 3, I grew up with, I had Shoplifter on the Master System, and that game was so much fun. It was hard, but, you know, the general mechanics of flying in, over, avoiding cannons, rescuing the POWs, bringing them back, you know, there was a lot of strategy. It was a little bit more of a thinking, um, deliberate piloting of the ship, you know, to obviously not crash and not get shot down and kill all the people you just rescued. So in Shoplifter 3, they updated the game. They made the stages a little more challenging, more caverns to fly into, more obstacle hazards. And, you know, the graphics are upped a little bit. I mean, it's as early 16-bit, so nothing crazy, but they're serviceable. They do the job. So this is Cotton 100%, and you know, the Cotton games have been made on almost every platform, but this one is probably the most accessible, and it's just a lot of fun. Very vibrantly colored. Yeah, she's a witch, but there's not as many. Everything's very cheery and poppy in this game, so this would be a fantastic introduction to shmups. You know, for people who are interested and ask what's a good one to start off with, I'd say Cotton 100%. This game is a game. So it's a helicopter game, and you can, when you hit the shoulder buttons, you can zoom in or out on. You can play on different levels, and the hit detection, I swear the hit detection is twice the size of your sprite. You know, I could watch a bullet visibly pass by the side and watch it take me down. So it wasn't programmed very well. It had some potential, you know. The music is absolutely trash. It sounds like the opening to an 80s sitcom on a loop. And it's a very short loop too. It's like 8 seconds. It's just kind of over and over and over and over and over again. So I only have this game because I wanted to collect the whole subset of shooters. And that's really the only reason why I have it. So Darius Twin is, I think it's the first 2-player Darius game. And, you know, there's Darius games on the PC Engine, a couple on the Mega Drive, and I like Darius games a lot because I think they do a great job with the boss sprites, the graphic design, and you see a lot of that here too. And this one is actually probably the easiest Darius game, now that I think about it. It's 2-player co-op, but even aside from that, the simple fact that your power-ups don't diminish when you die. When you come back and it's an instant spawn, you still have the same level of power-ups, which makes the game tremendously easier than all of the others. So it's a lot of fun. Another great beginners shooter. This is Dayzemon. This is the shmup maker. You can kind of make your own shooter game on Super Famicom. I actually haven't done much with this game. I just kind of never had the time to dive in and try to figure it out and how to get it all working. So I hear good things about it, but haven't personally tried it yet. So EDF, Earth Defense Force. You know, I consider this an average game. Nothing about this game jumps out to me. Now, there's the decent amount of action on the screen going on. You do get to level up your weapons, and they're initially very, very weak. And I think when you die, I think you keep your level progression on your weapons. So that's a good thing. I don't find it very interesting. I think the weapons are kind of, or at least I think everything about this is kind of bland. The designs, the enemies, they all look like squares or cubes. It's kind of lame. So, you know, just another game. Firepower 2000. So there was a game called Silkworm, and I think this is a spiritual successor to that, where there's a tank, a ground-based vehicle, and a helicopter, and that makes this also a 2-player co-op game. So, you know, the being a Jeep, you have to contend with ground hazards, but by being in the plane, you don't have to worry about the ground hazards, but, you know, maybe there's more aerial enemies. I can't remember exactly how they tweaked the difficulty, but it's fun to play as 2 players, so it's definitely a unique experience if you're playing as one versus the other, and you can choose when you play a single-player game which one you want to be. So they also ported this to the Genesis, or I'm sorry, the Mega Drive. I think maybe it was a PAL exclusive called Mega Swiv or something like that. But for some reason, that game didn't play as well as this one does. This one just has tighter control. It's a fun game. It's just, you know, solid. So this is Flying Hero. Now, I only heard about this game recently. It did, you know, just by looking at the cover, you kind of have no idea what to expect. But this is a cute 'em up in the vein of almost like Twinbee. You know, you're a character sprite flying around. Everything's very, very colorful. And very under the radar, right? So it's not too hard, right? So it's a good introduction. And I think you have weapons, selectable weapons, and yeah, so totally underrated or not talked about. Gradius 3, everyone knows Gradius 3 was a game that was released very early. It was almost a launch window game. It's a seminal classic. You know, the Gradius series kind of, this might be the peak of the sprite-based Gradius games. Between the selectable weapon loadouts at the beginning and just like the stage design, you know, the variety of stages, the variety of enemies, it gets pretty difficult, but it's mediated by the slowdown, whether the slowdown in this game was intentional or not. It actually helps you kind of evade the bullets when things get kind of crazy. So this is, it's an early example of game, but it is an example of a game that was very well done, except for the slowdown. Right, the music is fantastic. Now, Konami has great music on almost all of their games, and this is no exception. Very, very memorable music. So this is Hyperzone. This is a rail shooter that you fly into the screen. It's almost as if you made F-Zero a shooter. Is kind of what this is like. So all the focus in this game is kind of like on the zooming backgrounds, and the floor and the ceiling almost mirror each other. So you have 2 levels of that flying into the background. Nothing real, you know, innovative besides that. So it's almost like it's a tech demo for what the visuals could be, but the designs of anything is just cubes and squares. So you know, it's fun for a couple quick playthroughs, but it's just not great as a shooter, I don't think. So this game is called Dion, or in the United States it's known as Imperium. Now, Imperium is, some people call it a poor man's Musha, and that, I don't know if that's fair. It's a good game on its own. You're a mech that flies around. You've got selectable weapons. It's you know, even though it has that label, it's still a fun game to play on its own. Very under the radar, right? So not very well known, but a solid game too. All right, Macross Scrambled Valkyrie. This, in my opinion, is the best shooter on the SNES, at least for horizontal. It's not a Macross license, so you know you've got your Max, your Miria, and your Rick, and actually he's called Hikaru because this is Macross. It's not Robotech; it's Japanese. But each player has, you know, the Veritech has different flying styles. They have different weapon loadouts. And each of the everybody has 3 weapons, and they're each individually upgradable. And depending on the stage, depending on, you know, on what the situation calls for, some weapons are better than others. Now, even though each of the 3 players has 3 different weapons, each player, you can get through the game with each of them because they're well balanced, you know. Everybody has a little bit of everything that they need to get through the game. The visuals are amazing. The graphics, just, you know, obviously they're inspired by the Macross license franchise. The music is fantastic. Just the control is pacing. I think everything about this game is just absolutely fantastic. This is a perfect 10, in my opinion. I really don't understand why they didn't license this, you know, as Robotech here in the States, because Robotech was a big thing in the 80s. You know, kids my age all flocked home to watch it after school. They totally could have had a foothold, but they just didn't. So here's Parodius. The Parodius was ported also to the Famicom PC Engine, but this version is, by the time this came around on Super Famicom, it seemed like they had to totally figure it out, because the amount of slowdown that was in Gradius, this doesn't have as much slowdown, but it has just as much action, so it's definitely hectic. Now, it does have a cutesy appearance. You know, your selectable characters, I think there's 4 of them, are all very cute. Their weapons are matched to the character's physiology, you know, so there's lots of replay value based on who you pick. So it's definitely difficult. Just because it's cute does not mean it's easy. There's so much going on the screen at once. And as far as the music, it's all like upbeat classical music, you know, which is like, you know, free license to use, you know, which makes sense. It's done very well. It's upbeat. It keeps the game going along. And the bosses are zany. This probably the best example of a cute 'em up, I think. This is the Parodius series. So this is the Gokuchu Parodius, which is, you know, the second game. Plays just like the first one, just with now more characters, more zaniness, you know. The music style is still the same. With more characters comes more weapon power-ups that are unique. Just as fast and frenetic, you know, just as good. It's, you know, if you can stumble across any one of these Parodius games for the Super Famicom, you know, they'll play in your Super Nintendo. You just got to do that tab modification on the inside panel of your Super Nintendo. Just cut the tabs and the cartridges will fit. Okay, so this is GQ Oh Sabri Parodius, which is the third game. And this game, you know, now there's like 16 characters, right? So there's way more characters to choose from. Again, with every new character introduced, the replay value just like doubles. And the gimmick about this one is that there's an announcer narrating the game, narrating what's going on the whole time. And of course, this is Super Famicom, so he's speaking Japanese. So I have no idea what he's saying, but it's kind of crazy. It's almost distracting, but not really, because you don't know what he's saying. But it's the fact that he's always talking. You can kind of like, you know, get used to it, but it is a little annoying. So I notched this one down a little bit from the other ones because of that. But it's still amazing that we got 3 of these, or the 3 of these games came out on Super Famicom. Now it makes sense why this was not ported, right? Because of the whole language barrier. But the other 2, I think, should have been. So here's the infamous cover, Phalanx. The game that you wouldn't know was a shooter. You really wouldn't have any idea. I mean, maybe you'd notice that was a ship in the top cover there, but it's, you know, the cover does the game a disservice. This game is deeper than it lets on. So the Phalanx here, you've got, this is a very challenging game. I feel like the bullet count is very, very high in this game. There's hidden levels if you're able to find them, but you know, it's a very solid game. It doesn't stand out when you play it. It kind of looks like most of the other games. So visually, I don't think this really stands out. But as the gameplay is decently deep, you'll realize like, oh wow, I didn't know I could do that, or I didn't know I could go there, or you know, as far as weapons, there's a variety of weapons. They get powered up. But just such a weird design choice. So poppin' Twinbee. Twinbee actually came out in the US for the Nintendo called Stinger. And so it was a big franchise over in Japan. So here it is on Super Famicom. And it's very colorful. It's a cute 'em up. You know, the whole thing with Twinbee is that because they have hands, so they're like ships that shoot, but they also have hands, and the hands throw bombs on the ground. And so you have ground targets, and you have targets in the air. And the way that you get powered up is when you shoot a cloud, there's a bell that pops out of the cloud. And if you keep shooting the bell, it will change colors. And if you grab the bell when it's a certain color, that denotes a certain power-up. So there's some strategy to that. You know, some people hate that because it's you know, you're constantly accidentally shooting the bell to be something other than the one you want. And that's true, so you have to mind that. But it's a Konami, so it's generally high quality around, right? And I've played the other Twinbee games on all the other consoles, and I think this is the most accessible. This one just seems to be not as vicious as the PC Engine versions. So this is Ryden Trad. This was also ported to nearly everything. They also, the Genesis version and this came out around the same time, I think. This version is wider. It's like the pixel resolution is slightly different, so they had to stretch this one out a little bit. It's got more colors than the Genesis version, but the problem with this game is that it's not smooth. It's very juddery. Like the frame rate is like you're slowly like bouncing up the screen. So it's kind of hard to play, for me at least, over time. You do instant spawn. That some people like that better, you know, and for a shooter, but that could be good or bad depending on how many power-ups are available, right? So generally not regarded as one of the better ports, and I agree with that. Super RType. So I believe this is a reworking of RType 2 to bring it to the Super Nintendo. And there's so much potential with this because the RType series, you know, is generally beloved. But they messed up, you know, in a major way in that your death brings you back to the beginning of the entire stage. It doesn't matter where you die. You could be, you know, almost have defeated the boss, and if you die, you go back to the beginning of the entire stage. So it's hard to enjoy that, right? Unless you're so good at it where you can do a no hit, and then, well, I guess that doesn't matter. But you know, the music's pretty good. You still have your charge shot, but you got a 2-level charge shot, I think. So they have some good ideas. You know, the visuals, the graphics, you know, the enemy design, sprite design, all look great on this game, but that critical flaw really holds this one down. So the sequel, RType 3, which might be confusing because there was no mention of 2 on that one, but, you know, this was a reworking of RType 2, which they didn't tell you. So this is RType 3, and this was a system exclusive. So everything got better on this. The stage designs, the pacing, the graphics, the music. It's just a really, really good game. They bring in mode 7, so there's some stages where you kind of have to watch your environment and stay within the confines. So it's definitely challenging, and one of the better games on this, way up there as far as horizontal. This might be like, you know, up there near Scramble Valkyrie, right? So this is Sonic Wings. Sonic Wings is known as Aero Fighters, right? So in Japan, the franchise was called Sonic Wings, but in US, and it's a nice, straightforward, solid game. Like, if you know, it's a military fighter, and you have different selectable characters, and they're kind of zany. Where like one's you know, you can pick a baby, you can pick a dolphin, you can pick people from different you know, countries, and of course they have different planes with different characteristics and different weapons. So again, with so much variety to choose from and who to play as, you know, this has lots of replay value. There's some funny cutscenes in between each stages where your character will say something that's sometimes nonsensical. The US version is probably one of the most expensive carts for the Super Nintendo, whereas this is like dirt cheap. You know, I got this for like $10 or something back in the day, but I was not going to pay as much as the US one was going for. Hey, look, it's Space Invaders on the Super Nintendo, and it plays like Space Invaders on the Atari. Okay, one of my favorite developers is Compile, and they are the ones who made the Lust series and like Musha, and Blazing Lasers, things like that. So Space Megaforce is the best vertical shooter on the console. They just figured out how to do a vertical shooter well on Super Nintendo. And it's not because it's a fast-paced game. It's just because it's very well designed. Your ship has, there's like 8 different weapons to choose from, and each weapon you can adjust the fire direction and spread by hitting the bumpers. And so there's so much depth in terms of how you want to attack, what kind of weapon you want to have. The stages are very highly environmental, so you're constantly navigating, you know, labyrinths. And, you know, of course, the different weapons will be suited more for different stages. The music's pretty good, but mainly it's the gameplay that makes this stand out. It's just very, very tight. If I had a complaint about this, it's that maybe some of the stages are a little too long. I'm thinking especially of like the second stage. They could have cut that out in half and it still would have been fine. So a well-regarded game and the best vertical shooter. So this is Spriggan Powered, and this was not released in the US, so this is obviously a repro. But the thing about Spriggan Powered is that because this was such a late game in the console, pre-rendered graphics were becoming popular, like, you know, in Donkey Kong Country and Vector Man. And so they tried to apply that here. And because of that, there was a shift to more of like a realistic looking type game, you know, as far as visuals. And I think that's to the detriment, because it's very greens and browns and just boring looking. The weapons are okay. You know, I think that all the graphical power processing went into the actual pre-rendered sprites, and so maybe there wasn't enough to make the weapon systems look very interesting, because they're not. They're just like balls, you know, spheres. So, but, you know, you can tell like this was like a bridge game between 2D and 3D, because it wants to be 3D so bad. It's fun overall, you know, but it's definitely not worth the asking price. The real cart is in the high hundreds, but there's other ways to play it by now. So this is a PAL exclusive. This is called Super Drop Zone, or I guess Archer McLean's Super Drop Zone, and it's a jetpack game, but it's literally Defender, right? So, you know, you fly back and forth, and you like save people, and, you know, there's obstacles that come down from the sky, and it doesn't mean it's not fun. It's very fluid and controls very well, but the idea I don't think is very original at all. It's just they made a jetpack guy in a Defender game, and so it's okay. Strike Gunner STG. For the longest time, I didn't know I should say when I first got this game, I didn't know what STG stood for, and then later on I found out it stood for shooting game, in Japan at least, because it should have just called it Strike Gunner here. So this game is interesting. You can play 2-player co-op, and you have a wide variety of weapons to choose from at the beginning of the game. But the catch is, once you use a weapon, you can't reuse it for another stage. So it's like you depleted it, and your second stage you got to pick from whatever remains, and so on. So there's some strategy there. You have to know what each of the weapons do when you're going to need them. That's probably the most interesting thing about this game. The enemy patterns are very, very lame, And another game where they kind of just stretched it out, and it just keeps going, and the same basic patterns of popcorn enemies keep showing up. And each stage, oh my god, it feels like the first stage was like 10 minutes long. It wasn't. It's just very, very. I don't know. It was lazy programming, I think. So, not a huge fan. Supernova. So this is like the Darius Pro player version of Darius. If Darius Twin was the introductory level, this is like the AP level. So it's a lot more challenging, more difficult patterns, more inventive patterns. The enemy designs, boss types are way more intricate and involved and detailed. So for that, it's like once you've mastered the earlier Darius games, you could go on to this, but I definitely would not start with this. Right, this is too difficult of a game to jump into because it'll sour your taste for Darius games if you start with this one. So basically for pros only, but it's well regarded generally. Thunder Spirits. So if you owned a Super Nintendo and you liked Thunder Force 3, then you probably would have wanted to get this game. Or not owned, if you wanted Thunder Force 3. It's a port of the Thunder Force 3 arcade game. And it's trying to do what the Genesis did, but, it just doesn't quite get there. It's like 80%. The speed of the gameplay, the graphical prowess, especially the Fire Stage Gorgon. It's in this game, you see it trying to pull it off, but, you could tell it's definitely losing frames, and it's chock full of slowdown. The music doesn't have the same punch because it doesn't have the same sound chip as the Genesis does. Now, the SNES obviously has lots of very good music, but most of that music is orchestrated, whereas on the Genesis, that sound chip set, those bit tunes are a lot more punchy. So, and I don't even think it has rapid fire. I think you have to do a special trick to like go into a menu to turn rapid fire on. It's they tried to bring it over, and they just, didn't do a great job. And my last Super Nintendo shooter is UN Squadron. So we're going out on a high note here. Now, UN Squadron, this game, I don't think it has anything to do with the UN, but it's because this was originally based on a Japanese anime called Area 88. But because nobody in the States knew what that was, that name didn't really make sense, so they tried to make it something a little bit more ubiquitous. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the title is. This is a fantastic game. The stage design. So you have three different pilots to choose from, and they have different skill sets. Like one is hardier, you can take more hits. One of them has mastery of better weapons, more weapons right off the bat. One of them's like an in-between guy. And you can, as you progress and shoot down planes, because you're a mercenary, you earn money, and with money you can buy better planes and more weapon loadouts, and get through the stages a little easier with all these upgrades. It's a lot of fun, I don't know what else to say. Everything's so good about this game. The music is great. It's tight controls, tight gameplay. And if you haven't played UN Squadron, at first it might be a little intimidating because it might seem like, oh, this is too hard, but it's really not. You just have to not play this. You have to play it very deliberately, right? You'll learn to track enemy shots and where the predictable shot patterns will go. And then, that's kind of memo heavy, right? You have to memorize where things appear. But once you do, this is a blast to play. It's so much fun. And you can even watching your weapons upgrade as you collect power capsules gradually throughout the game. So it's also satisfying to get to one of the more higher power levels and staying there. So, this is, we're ending on a good note. So that's my Super Nintendo / Super Famicom shooters collection. I'm sure there's probably one or more two out there that I don't have, especially for the Super Famicom. If one comes to mind, let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.